I buried it with my own hands, 4 feet down in the clay and granite of the Canadian Shield. Took me 2 full days. My palms bled through the blisters, and the blisters reformed and bled again, and I did not stop. I could not stop, because the thing lying in that clearing, the thing I had to put into the ground before anyone else found it, was something the world says does not exist, and I had just watched it die. My name is Jean-Pierre Bouchard. I am 79 years old, and the thing inside my lungs is finishing what 46 years of silence started. The doctors at the Centre Hospitalier in Val d'Or gave it a name. Idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis means my lungs are turning to stone and nobody knows why. I know why. I have been holding my breath since October of 1978. A man can only do that for so long before his body decides to collect. But why would a Quebecois logger bury something in the middle of the boreal forest and never tell a soul? Why would he keep that secret for 47 years? Through a marriage, through 3 children, through a wife's death, and never once let the truth slip. What was so important about that clearing, that cairn, that map he drew and kept in his coat pocket every single day since? I am going to tell you all of it because I am out of time, and the truth is too heavy to take into the ground. I was born in Saint-Émilie-de-l'Énergie, a small parish town in the Lanaudière region of Quebec. Church bells rang twice on Sundays. The only thing taller than the steeple was the black spruce behind the cemetery. My père worked the mills in Joliette. His père before him drove logs down the Rivière l'Assomption with nothing but a pike pole and a pair of caulk boots that leaked in April. The Bouchard men have always followed timber. It is in us the way the current is in the river. You do not choose it. You are born into the pull. By 1971, I was 25. 4 seasons under my belt with Domtar up near Seneterre. I ran a timberjack skidder through terrain that would make a mountain goat think twice, dragging 8-foot spruce logs through muskeg so soft your boot would disappear to the knee if you stood still too long. I loved it. The cold mornings when the diesel had to be coaxed awake, the way the forest smelled after the first frost, that sharp, resinous scent that scrubs every other thought from your mind. The camps, even the bad ones where the cook served pea soup so thick you could patch a tire with it and the bunkhouse smelled like wet wool and tobacco and honest exhaustion. I was strong then, calloused across every finger, shoulders broad enough to fill a doorframe. I could carry a chainsaw and a jug of bar oil up a slope that would wind a deer all day. I did not know what it meant to struggle for a breath. I married Colette in the summer of 1973, Église Saint-Aimé in Amos. Her father looked at me like I was a stray dog who had wandered into the wrong house. He was not wrong to be suspicious. I was a logger. I smelled like diesel and spruce gum. My dress shoes had sawdust ground into the soles no matter how many times I cleaned them. But Colette chose me the way she chose everything, with a certainty that did not require anyone else's approval. She wore her mare's veil and a dress she had sewn herself. When she walked down the aisle, I forgot every tree I had ever felled. She was the clearing in the forest. She was the quiet space where the light comes through. And the cruelest thing I ever did to that woman was build a wall between us out of something she could not see. But I am getting ahead of myself. The story does not start with Colette. It starts with 3 knocks in the dark. Fall of 1975. A cut block northwest of Chibougamau, deep in the boreal, James Bay country. You have to understand what that means. This is not a place where you drive up on a paved road and park beside a trailhead with a washroom and a map on a board. This is hundreds of kilometers of unbroken spruce and jack pine and tamarack, rivers with no names on any map you will find in a gas station. In October, the sun comes up gray and goes down gray, And everything in between is gray, too. The silence up there is not the absence of sound. It is a presence, a pressure. The bush has a weight to it that sits on your shoulders whether you notice it or not. We were 8 men in a camp that was nothing but plywood over 2x4s, propane cook stove, enough canned goods to last until the road froze solid enough for the supply truck. I was lid faller by then. I marked the cuts, chose the lay of every tree. Good work, I was proud of it. Second week, Tuesday. I remember because Marty was the day I always wrote letters to Colette. She was back in Amos, pregnant with our first. I had just sealed an envelope. I can still see the blue ink on my fingers from that cheap pen. When I heard something outside. 3 knocks. Not random, not wind snapping a branch. 3 deliberate, evenly spaced knocks against the trunk of a tree, maybe 40 meters from the bunkhouse wall. I set the letter down. The other men were asleep, snoring the way loggers snore, which is like an engine that cannot find its idle. I went to the window, dark outside, the kind of dark where the glass just shows you your own face. I stood there listening. Nothing. I told myself it was a moose rubbing antlers, a dead snag settling in the frost. Reasonable explanations. I went back to my bunk, but I did not sleep well that night, and I did not know why. The knocking came back. 5 more times over 3 weeks, always at night, always in sets of 3. The other men heard it too. Gilles Thibault, our buckerman, said it was a woodpecker. But Big Paul Laframboise, half Cree on his mother's side, said nothing the first 3 times. After the 4th, he looked at me across the cook stove. Tabernacle, Jean-Pierre, you better leave that one alone. I asked him what he meant. He shook his head and went back to his beans. Big Paul was not a man who wasted words. When he chose silence over explanation, you learned more from the silence than you would have from any answer. Then the tracks appeared. Thursday morning, walking the skid trail before the crew started, a patch of soft clay beside a creek crossing. I stopped so fast the chainsaw on my shoulder swung forward and nearly took the hard hat off my head. Footprints. Not boot prints, not bear prints. I had seen 1,000 of those, spread wide at the toes with claw marks at the front. These were footprints like a man's, except they were enormous. I crouched down, measured one with my hand, pinky to thumb, spread wide, 2 full spans, and then some. Over 40 centimeters long, the stride between them, well over a meter. Whatever made them was walking upright, on 2 legs, heavy enough to sink more than 3 centimeters into clay that barely held my own boot print. I stared at those tracks for a long time. Then I looked up at the tree line. The spruce stood there the way it always stood, dark, silent, patient, giving away nothing. I marked the spot with orange flagging tape, and I said nothing to the crew. Now, what would you do? What would any man do, alone in a camp 100 kilometers from the nearest telephone, staring at evidence of something that should not exist? I will tell you what I did. I was afraid, and I was ashamed of being afraid, and those 2 things together made me stubborn. My pair would have gone out with his axe and a lantern, and the absolute certainty that nothing in the bush was bigger than a Bouchard man's stubbornness. I did not have his certainty, but I had his stubbornness, and stubbornness has driven more men into the unknown than courage ever has. I began staying awake after the others slept, sitting by the window, thermos of camp coffee that tasted like it had been filtered through a boot, watching the tree line. The glass fogged from my breath. I would wipe it clear with the sleeve of my Stanfields and press my face close and stare until my eyes ached. 5 nights passed. Nothing. On the 6th night, I saw it, standing at the edge of the clearing, just beyond where the slash piles ended and the standing timber began. Moon was 3/4 full. In its light, I could see the shape, massive, upright. broader across the chest than any man I have ever known. And I have known men who made their living throwing logs, 2.5 meters tall, possibly more, shoulders rounded forward slightly, the way a man's are when he is watching something carefully, arms hanging past its knees, covered in hair, not fur like an animal. Hair, dark brown or black, hard to tell in the moonlight. My coffee cup was halfway to my mouth. I froze. Not the way people freeze in movies, where they hold perfectly still and look dramatic, the way a rabbit freezes when the shadow of a hawk passes over it. Completely, involuntarily, every muscle locked in place by something deeper than thought. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my teeth. It stood there for maybe 15 seconds, not moving. I did not blink. I am not sure I breathed. The moonlight caught its outline, and I could see the chest moving, in, out, slow, steady. It was breathing the way something breathes when it is calm, when it is not threatened, when it is exactly where it intends to be. Then it turned and walked back into the spruce, not running, not hurrying, walking. The way a man walks away from a conversation he has decided is finished. 3 strides, and the darkness took it. 3 strides, and it was gone. And I stood at that window for another hour, coffee going cold in my hand, my reflection staring back at me from the glass, looking like a man who had just seen something that rewrote every rule he thought he knew about the world. I did not tell anyone, not the crew, not Colette, not anyone. I knew what I had seen. I also knew what would happen if I said it out loud. I was a Quebecois logger from a family of Quebecois loggers. Your word is your reputation. If Jean-Pierre Bouchard starts talking about monsters in the timber, Jean-Pierre Bouchard does not work anymore. Simple as that. So I kept quiet, but I started leaving things. I do not know what made me do it. Maybe it was Big Paul's look, that resigned knowing, like he understood exactly what was out there and had long ago made his peace. Maybe it was the way the creature had stood at the edge of the clearing without menace, just watching. Whatever the reason, I began leaving food at the edge of the bush, apples from the cook's stores, half a sandwich, set them on a stump near the flagging tape. In the morning, they would be gone. No scraps, no mess, just gone. Lifted carefully and carried away. By the 3rd week, something changed. I went to the stump. Food gone as usual, but beside the stump, a pile of something. I crouched down. Mushrooms, a dozen chanterelles, golden and clean, arranged in a neat row on a strip of birch bark. I have picked chanterelles my whole life. My mare used to fry them in butter with garlic, and the smell would fill the whole kitchen on a Sunday afternoon. These were perfect specimens, not a bruise, not a speck of dirt. Something had picked them carefully, cleaned them, left them where I would find them. I sat down on the cold ground and stared at those mushrooms and felt something shift inside my chest that had nothing to do with my lungs. Something was answering me. You have to understand what that means to a man who has spent his entire life in the bush. I knew animals. I knew their behavior. I knew that bears will eat anything you leave unattended and leave a mess doing it. I knew that ravens will steal shiny objects. I knew that squirrels will cache food in places you would never expect. But animals do not clean mushrooms. Animals do not arrange them in a row. Animals do not present them on a strip of bark like a gift on a plate. Whatever was taking my food and leaving chanterelles in return was operating from a place of intelligence and intention that no field guide I had ever read could account for. That night I lay in my bunk and listened to the wind and the snoring and the creak of the plywood walls, and I thought about those chanterelles for hours, not about what had left them, about what leaving them meant. It meant comprehension. It meant reciprocity. It meant that somewhere in that vast, dark, silent forest, something had received my offering, understood it as a gesture of goodwill, and decided to respond in kind. with something personal, something chosen. The chanterelles were not random. They were local, seasonal, and edible, which meant whatever left them knew what I could eat. That thought kept me awake until dawn. The exchanges continued through that season and into the next. 1976, 77, 78. I left food. Something took it. Something left gifts in return. Quartz stones arranged in a circle. A bundle of cedar boughs tied with a strip of inner bark. A section of deer antler polished smooth. These were not random objects dropped by wind or water. These were offerings. Deliberate, considered, reciprocal. Whatever was out there understood exchange. It understood gesture. It understood the concept of giving something back. In the spring of 77, Big Paul approached me after supper. The other men were playing cards. Someone had the Canadians game on a transistor radio. Paul motioned with his chin toward the door. We stepped outside. Raw air. Melting snow. Diesel from the generator. Paul rolled a cigarette, lit it, and stood there smoking for a full minute. Then he said it. "You have been feeding it." It was not a question. I did not insult him by denying it. He smoked some more. He said his kokum, his grandmother, called them the old ones. Mistapu. She said they have been here since before the Cree, before anyone. She said they remember things we have forgotten. You do not hunt them. You do not run from them. You leave them their space and hope they leave you yours. He looked at me. And you do not tell the white bosses. I told him I was not planning to. He nodded, finished his cigarette, went back inside. That was the longest conversation Big Paul and I ever had about what was in the bush. It was also the most important conversation of my life, because it told me I was not crazy. Whatever I was experiencing, someone else's grandmother had a name for it. It had a history. It belonged to the land the way the rivers did, the way the granite did, the way the black spruce did. I saw it 3 more times during those years. Once at dusk, crossing a frozen beaver pond 200 meters ahead, moving with a stride that covered ground faster than I could have run. Once at dawn, standing in mist at the base of a granite outcrop, watching me from across a narrow valley. And once, the time that broke something open in me, crouched beside a stream in the middle of the day, holding a fish in its hands, eating it the way a man eats corn on the cob, turning it slowly, working methodically from one end to the other. It heard me before I saw it. Its head came up, 3 or 4 seconds. We looked at each other from maybe 60 meters apart, face flat and broad, nose wide, brow heavy and ridged. But the eyes were what stopped me, brown, deep brown, with a quality I can only describe as recognition, not the blank stare of a moose, not the sharp, calculating look of a wolf. Recognition. The way one person looks at another and says without words, "I know you have been here before. I need to stop for a moment. The fibrosis, the air does not come easy anymore. Feels like breathing through a wool blanket that gets thicker every month." There was a time I could shout across a cut block and the boys would hear me over the machinery. Now I cannot finish a sentence without this wheeze catching me like a hand around my throat. But I am going to finish this, because what happened next is the part I have carried longest, the part that has weighed the most, the part that, in 47 years, I have never said out loud. By the summer of 1978, something was different. I could feel it the way a faller feels when a tree is not going to lay where you planned it. A subtle wrongness in the air, a change in the way the forest sounded. The whiskey jacks, which normally came straight to camp looking for scraps, kept their distance. The ravens circled higher than usual. Their calls carried a note I had not heard before, not alarm, something watchful, attentive, tracking a change that had not yet reached the ground. The gifts at the stump were different, smaller, less carefully arranged. Once, nothing at all, just the food gone and an impression in the moss where something large had sat for a long time. I found tracks that dragged, one foot leaving a deeper mark than the other, favoring a leg. It moved more slowly, at distance. The stride that had once eaten ground was shorter. The massive shoulders were more rounded. The hair showed patches of gray that caught the light differently. Something was wrong with it, and I felt that knowledge settle in my stomach like a stone. September of that year, 12 kilometers from the main camp. The company had pulled the crew back for a union dispute. I stayed behind to do maintenance on the skidder, alone. Engine covers off, hands deep in a fuel line. Then I heard a sound that made every hair on my arms stand straight. A vocalization, not a howl, not a scream, not anything I had heard from any animal in 40-some years in the bush. Low and sustained, like a note held on a church organ, a vibration I could feel in my chest. 300 meters northwest. It sounded like grief. I do not say that to be dramatic. It sounded like something was mourning. I set down my wrench, picked up my pack, first aid kit, water bottle, the pocket knife my pair had given me when I turned 13. I did not bring the rifle. I had stopped bringing the rifle to the stump exchanges 2 years earlier. It had felt like the right decision every time. I walked northwest. The sound came twice more, each time lower, each time longer. Thick regrowth, balsam fir and tag alder whipping at my face. 20 minutes of pushing through brush that left welts on my forearms and scratches across my cheeks. My heart was pounding, but it was not fear, not exactly. It was the feeling you get when you know something is about to change forever. When you can feel the ground shifting under you before the earth actually moves. Then a clearing I had never known was there, 15 meters across. Old-growth white spruce brought down by some past windstorm. Trunks crisscrossed on the ground like the bones of something enormous. Moss covered everything in a thick green carpet, and the light in the clearing was different from the rest of the forest. Softer, filtered through a gap in the canopy that let the sky in. It felt like a room, a private room, a place chosen, not stumbled upon, and in the middle of them, partially hidden by regrowth, was the creature, lying on its side, breathing audible from where I stood, deep, wet, labored. I recognized the sound. I hear something like it now every morning when I wake up. Its great chest rose and fell unevenly. With every exhale, a rattling, ribs moving beneath hair that was thinner than I remembered, patchy in places, gray where it had once been dark. It was old, and it was dying. I stepped into the clearing. Its head came up. Slowly, those eyes found me. No alarm, no fear, just recognition, tinged with exhaustion. It knew me, and it had come here to do what all living things do when the end approaches. It had gone to ground. I crossed the distance between us, 20 steps, the longest 20 steps of my life. I crouched beside it, close enough to touch. The smell, earthy, musky, not unpleasant, wet soil and old cedar. Its body was enormous even lying down. The arm nearest me thicker than my thigh, the hand broad as a dinner plate, fingers tapering to blunt, dark nails. It watched me with one eye, the other pressed against the moss. I opened my first aid kit, not because anything in it could help, because it was the only gesture I knew how to make. Its eye followed my hands. I sat with it for hours. The sun moved across the sky. Shadows shifted. Temperature dropped. I did not move. I talked, because that is what you do when someone is dying and there is nothing else to offer. The words came out the way water comes from a spring, from somewhere underground, from a place I did not know was there. I told it about Colette, about the baby coming, about the way the light hits the St. Maurice River in autumn when the maples are turning and the whole valley looks like it is on fire. I told it about my pear and the pike pole, about pea soup and chanterelles and church bells on a cold Sunday morning in Saint-Émilie, when the whole parish would file out of Mass and the men would stand in the yard smoking and talking about hockey, and there was a feeling of belonging so complete it needed no name. I told it about Big Paul's grandmother and the stories, about the time I almost drowned in the Nottoway River when I was 22, and something, the current, God, luck, stubbornness, released me, and I washed up on a gravel bar, coughing water and swearing in a language my mare would not have approved of. And the creature listened. Its breathing slowed as I talked. At one point it shifted its massive hand and placed it very gently against my knee. The weight of it was extraordinary. The warmth of it, like putting your hand on a wood stove that has been burning all day. I put my hand on top of its hand, felt the rough texture of its skin, the thick fingers, the slow pulse of blood beneath, and I cried. Sitting in a clearing in the middle of the boreal forest in northern Quebec, I cried the way I had not cried since I was a boy, the kind of crying that comes from a place below language, below thought, from the place where you understand that something sacred is ending and there is nothing you can do to stop it. It died in the early hours of the morning. I had dozed off against a fallen spruce trunk. When I woke, the hand on my knee was still. The great chest had stopped moving. Silence. Complete. I could hear my own blood in my ears. I sat there until the sun came up. Gray, thin light through the spruce canopy. It looked smaller than it had in life. The way all things look smaller when the force that animated them has gone. Eyes closed. Expression peaceful. I noticed things I had not noticed before. A scar on its left forearm, long healed, the hair growing thin around it. The way its fingers curled inward naturally, like a man who has held tools all his life. Gray hairs concentrated at its temples and around its jaw, the same pattern you see in old men everywhere, as though aging follows the same map regardless of what kind of creature you are. I reached out, touched the hair on its forearm, coarser than any animal hair I had felt, like wire brush bristles, but the skin underneath, surprisingly soft, still faintly warm, the heat taking its time to leave the way embers stay warm long after the fire has gone. I spoke to it again. I think I told it about the first time I heard the 3 knocks. I think I told it I was sorry I never learned how to knock back. Then I did the thing I have never told anyone until now. I buried it. I need you to understand. I didn't make this decision after careful thought. I did not weigh the options. I did not consider what science might want, what the government might demand, what the world might need to know. I looked at that body lying in the clearing, that body that had left me chanterelles and quartz stones and braided cedar, that body whose hand had rested warm and heavy on my knee while I talked about church bells and pea soup, and I knew with absolute certainty that I could not leave it there to be found, not by hunters, not by hikers, not by researchers with their scalpels and their journals and their press conferences. This was not a specimen, this was someone, and someone deserves a grave. 2 full days. I went back to camp, got the shovel, the pry bar, the chainsaw, every ounce of strength that 25 years of logging had built into my body. I dug into the rocky clay soil of the Canadian Shield, hit granite at 4 feet, had to widen the hole rather than deepen it, chipping at bedrock with the pry bar until my hands bled and my back screamed, and the blisters on my palms broke and reformed and broke again. The creature was heavy beyond anything I can adequately describe. I used the skidder's winch cable and log rollers I cut from birch to move it into the grave. I will not describe the mechanics in more detail than that. Some things deserve dignity even in the telling. I piled stones on top, the biggest I could carry, then smaller ones, a cairn about 1 meter high. I cut cedar boughs and laid them over the stones the way my grandmère used to lay cedar on the graves in the parish cemetery. The smell was sharp and clean. It mixed with the turned earth and the faint musk, and I breathed it in and felt something break and mend in the same moment, like a bone setting. I did not say a prayer. The priests in Saint-Émilie had never covered this particular scenario. I said the only thing I could think of. Merci, thank you, for the chanterelles, for the quartz stones, for the mornings when I knew you were there and the forest felt less empty because of it, for letting me be the one who was here at the end. I stood at the edge of the clearing for a long time. Light fading, temperature dropping, a raven calling somewhere to the east, my hands raw and bleeding, my back a solid wall of pain, 2 days without food, and I felt for the first and only time in my life that I had done something truly important. Not important the way the world measures it, important the way the earth measures it. I had honored something, I had given it rest. Then I drew a map, sat on a stump, took out the notebook I used for skidder maintenance records, drew the most precise map I could, the access road, creek crossings, old cut blocks, bearing from the ridge with the burnt snag, distances in paces, compass bearings in degrees, landmarks, a split boulder, a beaver dam, a stand of birch that grew in a perfect line like soldiers. I folded the map and put it in my coat pocket. It has been there every day since. 47 years, through every job, every move, every night in bed beside Colette while she slept, and I stared at the ceiling and felt the secret pressing against the inside of my ribs like a second set of bones. Colette, mon Dieu, she was the finest woman who ever drew breath in the province of Quebec. I say that with the full bias of a man who loved her for 43 years and never once deserved it. A pharmacist's daughter from Amos, with dark hair and a laugh that could fill a room the way sunlight fills a window. She made tourtière every Christmas Eve from her mare's recipe, the one with the cloves and the cinnamon that the English families always got wrong. She raised our 3 children largely alone because I was in the bush 10 months of the year, and she did it with a grace I am only now old enough to recognize as extraordinary. She deserved the truth, she asked me once. Spring of 1982, kitchen table in Amos, radio playing, our oldest, Mathieu, asleep upstairs. She said, "Jean-Pierre, qu'est-ce que tu caches? What are you hiding?" And I looked at her, and I said, "Rien, nothing." The lie sat between us like a stone in a stream. The water of our marriage flowed around it for 37 years. I never moved it. She died in 2019. Ovarian cancer, fast and cruel. She went from the strongest woman I knew to a whisper in 6 months. I held her hand in the hospital in Val d'Or, and I thought about telling her then. About the clearing, the creature, the cairn. I rehearsed it in my head while she slept. I imagined her face, the way her eyebrows would draw together when she was concentrating, the way she would tilt her head slightly to the left when she was trying to decide if she believed something. I imagined her saying, "Jean-Pierre, pourquoi tu m'as pas dit? Why didn't you tell me?" And I imagined saying, "Because I was afraid you would think I was fou, crazy." And she would have said, "After 43 years, you think I don't know you are a little bit foul?" And she would have laughed. That laugh, the one that filled the room. But she was already so far away, already leaving. I could not burden her last hours with the weight of my secret. I let her go without it. That is my greatest failure, not the burial, not the silence. The fact that I chose the secret over honesty with the one person who earned my honesty more than anyone else on this earth. If I could change one thing, not the burial, not the knocking, not the 47 years of silence, I would change that moment. I would sit on the edge of that hospital bed and take her hand and say, "Colette, I have something to tell you." And I would tell her everything. And whatever came after that, the shock, the disbelief, the questions, at least it would have been honest. At least the last thing between us would not have been a stone in a stream. But here is the thing I did not expect, the thing that changed everything I thought I understood about what I had buried. I went back. spring of 1979. First thaw after the burial. The cairn was undisturbed, cedar boughs dried and faded but still in place, but around the clearing in the soft earth of the thaw, there were tracks, fresh tracks, the same massive prints, but different sizes. Some as large as the ones I had first seen in '75, others slightly smaller. They circled the cairn, approached it, and retreated. Some so close the toes had brushed against the stones. They knew, whatever others were out there, family, kin, others of its kind, they had found the grave, and they had come to it the way people come to a cemetery, to stand, to be near, to acknowledge what was lost. In the years that followed, I found things on the cairn. A perfect white quartz stone the size of my fist, placed dead center, a bundle of grass, braided like a child's hair, laid across the top stones. Once, a feather, an eagle feather, positioned upright between two rocks, pointing straight at the sky. These were not random deposits from wind. These were ritual. These were mourning. Something out there grieved in a language of objects and gestures, and the cairn I had built had become a place of meaning for beings I could not see, but whose presence I felt every time I returned. The visits changed me. Each time I went back, I walked slower, looked harder, listened with a kind of attention I had never given the bush before. I began to understand things about that forest that I had worked in for decades without truly seeing. The way certain trees were bent, not by wind, but by hands. The way stones appeared in formations too deliberate to be natural, arranged in lines that pointed toward water sources, stacked in small towers at the edges of clearings. The way sound carried differently in places where the bush felt thickest, as though the silence itself was being managed. Something was shaping that landscape. Something was living in it with intention and intelligence and care, and I had been walking through it for years like a man who reads a book without ever learning the language. I had spent my whole career taking trees from that forest, felling them, skidding them, stacking them on trucks, and watching them disappear down roads I had helped build. I was good at it, efficient, productive. The company liked me because I could clear a block faster than anyone else in the crew. But now I began to understand that I was taking from something's home. Every tree I felled was a wall in someone's house. Every road I cut was a wound in someone's neighborhood. I did not stop logging. I could not. I had a family to feed and a mortgage to pay. And the pull of the timber was in my blood the way my pair had always said it was. But I changed how I did it. I started leaving buffer strips around clearings. I argued with the foreman about cutting too close to waterways. I developed a reputation for being difficult, for caring too much about the bush, for having gone soft in some way the younger men could not name. I had not gone soft. I had gone deep. I heard them over the years. The knocking continued. Different cut blocks, different camps, always sets of 3, twice the vocalization from far away. Once in '84, 2 of them communicating across a valley, call and response for 20 minutes, while I stood frozen on a ridge, my axe in my hand, breath making clouds in the November air. The tones shifted, higher, lower, longer, shorter, in patterns that repeated and varied the way phrases do in a conversation. One voice deep, resonant, the other higher, quicker. At one point, the deeper voice held a single note for 30 seconds. The forest vibrated. The higher voice answered with 3 short bursts that sounded almost like laughter. They were not animals, they were language. Rough, tonal, rhythmic language. I retired in 2004. My back had been telling me for a decade. The industry was changing. Mechanized processors replacing hand fallers. Young men coming into camps with Bluetooth speakers in their hard hats, who would not have known which end of a crosscut saw to grab. I do not blame them. Every generation has its tools. But mine were my hands and my eye and my knowledge of how a tree wants to fall. Those things were no longer valued. We settled into quiet life in Amos, mornings at the Tim Hortons with Réjean and old Claude Paquette, coffee, lies about fish, complaints about the government, the kind of life a man builds when the big years are behind him. But every October I went back, told Colette I was going moose hunting with Gilles. Gilles had died in '97, heart attack on the skid trail, gone before he hit the ground, the way every logger secretly hopes to go. But Colette did not know that, so the lie held. Another stone in the stream, 6 hours north, end of a logging road being eaten by the bush, 12 kilometers on foot to the clearing. The first few years after retirement, the walk was almost easy. My legs still had the decades of logging in them, the muscle memory of hills and muskeg and uneven ground. I could make the 12 kilometers in 3 hours and have the whole afternoon to sit with the cairn. I would arrive winded but not broken, and I would stand at the edge of the clearing the way the creature had once stood at the edge of mine, just watching for a moment before I entered, taking it in. The mosses growing thicker every year, the young spruce filling in the gap in the canopy, the cairn settling into the earth like it was becoming part of the landscape itself, like the forest was accepting it, drawing it down, making it permanent. Every year the walk took longer, every year I had less wind, but every year the cairn was there, and every year something new on it, a stone, a feather, a bundle, and I would add my own offering, an apple, the same gift I had started with. And I would sit on the fallen spruce trunk where I had once sat with my hand on a dying creature's hand, and I would be quiet, and I would listen. And sometimes from far away I would hear the 3 knocks. I never knocked back. I did not know how to do it right. I was afraid of doing it wrong, of sending a message I did not intend. So I just listened. And in the listening, I felt closer to whatever was out there than I had ever felt to most human beings. There is a kind of communion and shared silence that goes deeper than conversation. The bush taught me that. The creature taught me that. The last time was October of 2023. I barely made it. The fibrosis had taken so much of my lungs that 12 kilometers took 9 hours. Rest every 100 meters. I spent the night beside the cairn, listening to my own breathing, thinking about how the sound was not so different from the sound the creature had made in its last hours. In the morning, I placed my offering, an apple, and a copy of the map. I had made dozens of copies over the years, each more detailed than the last. The act of redrawing it had become a form of prayer. I placed it under a stone and said what I always said, merci, and then something I had never said before. Je suis désolé. I am sorry for keeping you a secret, for letting the world pretend you never existed, for not telling Colette. I made it back to my truck. I do not know how. There was a moment on a steep section where I sat down and genuinely considered that this might be where I stop. But the stubbornness that had driven me into the bush at 25 drove me out again at 77. My son Mathieu came to see me last week. He lives in Gatineau now, works for the federal government in natural resources. Ironic, given his father spent a lifetime cutting down the things he writes policy about. He sat in Colette's kitchen, looked at me with those eyes that are so much like hers, dark, steady, patient. Asked how I was feeling. I told him the truth about the fibrosis, that it is winning. Then I told him about the map, everything, the knocking, the tracks, the chanterelles, the dying creature, the cairn. He sat for a long time, did not interrupt, did not laugh, did not tell me I was losing my mind. When I finished, he was quiet for 2 full minutes. Then he said, "Papa, why did you never tell Maman?" And I could not answer, opened my mouth, and the fibrosis took the words before they formed. All that came out was the wheeze. He came around the table, put his hand on my shoulder, and we sat there, the two of us, in Colette's kitchen, with the silence of 47 years finally breaking apart like spring ice on the Harricana. The original map is in a metal box in my house, along with 3 photographs of the tracks I took with a disposable camera, 2 quartz stones from the stump exchanges, a tuft of coarse dark hair from the creature's body. I have never had any of it analyzed. Analysis would lead to discovery. Discovery would lead to the clearing, and the clearing belongs to them, not to science, not to television, not to the men with the helicopters and the tranquilizer guns who would come in the name of knowledge and leave with something caged. But I am dying. The fibrosis is not a negotiation. It is a verdict, and the truth deserves to survive me. The map is drawn, the box is packed, the words are said. The wind is coming in shorter now. The wool blanket on my lungs is getting thicker. The pauses between my sentences are getting longer. I do not know how many more of these breaths have my name on them, but the ones that are left feel lighter than the ones that came before. For 47 years, I held that breath. Now I have let it go. There is a part of me that worries. Whether someone will disturb the cairn, whether the bones will end up in a lab in Montreal or a glass case in Ottawa, labeled in Latin and stripped of every shred of dignity I tried to give them. Whether the tracks in the spring mud will stop coming because the ones who made them will know the secret has been broken. Whether someone will try to profit from it, sell the story, sell the location, sell the bones to the highest bidder. I cannot control that. I could not control the fibrosis or the cancer that took Colette, or the way the logging industry ground through that forest like teeth through bread. A man can only control what he gives and what he keeps. I kept this for 47 years. I am giving it now. Not because I am brave, because I am out of time, and the truth is too heavy to take into the ground. I saw one. I sat with it while it died. I buried it with my own hands, and I have heard the others, every year since, coming to the place where I laid it down, paying their respects in a language I cannot speak but have learned, after all this time, to understand. In a clearing in the boreal forest, under a cairn of stones and cedar, something extraordinary is resting, and in the earth around it, every spring, the tracks still come, 3 knocks in the dark. I am here, I am here, I am here.